what era did you work for Milius?
So I was with Milius around 2000. Well, actually, I started loitering in his office around 2000 when I joined the Warner Brothers Courier Department. And I worked with him up until about 2004. And then I had my own office, but saw him all the time there because we were right across the golf cart path from each other. But just an absolute privilege to be around. One of the all-time great. What sucks is at the time, right around the time Jeff Robinoff started running the studio, and he was the Warshawski's agent, he took over for Lorenzo de Bonaventura, and a guy who's been on this show quite a bit, Billy Gerber. And so things kind of shifted at the time because they didn't really respect Milius. He was kind of seen as this old antagonistic guard, and they didn't really give him the meetings he wanted. And Milius had all these fantastic scripts that were unproduced. Daniel Boone, Sante being the most intriguing because that's the Vietnam War American POW rescue mission where we land on the ground and face the Russian military advisors. And he had this great script about that action. And he had another script about like the French Foreign Legion fighting in Mexico to the last man, like some real battle where they, like when France invaded Mexico as a colony and tried to make it a colony, like around, I don't know, the 1860s or something.
Wow, that recent? 1860s?
Maybe before that. It was Civil War. It was Civil War when France controlled Mexico.
That's incredible. I've never
heard. And that's what actually Major Dundee by Peckinpah kind of highlights. It's all about the Chuck Heston film that Peckinpah directed. It's all about, going down to Mexico when it was under French control, to chase renegade Native Americans that were causing havoc. But Milius had all these great unproduced scripts and he could not get a meeting, and it was really frustrating. And the Warshawskis were talking about doing a sequel to Conan called King Conan Crown of Iron. And
sounds fucking awesome. I love that title already.
Yeah, and I remember Milius wrote the script, and he put all these Frank Frazetta like art in the script. And it was one of the first times I thumbed through a script because you could go to the Warner Brothers story department and they'd hand you any script if you want. Like I had Beetlejuice 2, whatever was interesting, they'd hand it to you and print it up for you to go read. And I remember like I looked at this one and he had all this art in it. And I'm like, damn, look at all this. You've got all the visuals here. And he was talking to Triple H, who I had to go get for the meeting to be like the new Conan the Barbarian, basically with Arnold having kind of a senior advisor role. And I remember, I'd worked for Arnold too, but on his lesser known movie, which was Collateral Damage, the one everyone forgets. And I remember telling Milius, because I worked during the days for producer Steve Ruther, Under Siege, Pretty Woman. And then Milius would come in at about 4:00. And I'd shift over around 5 to his office till 10. And I remember Schwarzenegger's on to do reshoots for Collateral Damage. And I tell Milius, I'm like, hey, your boy's here. He's like, well, let's go see him. Because he's like Hemingway. So we get on my golf cart and we go down to stage 8 where they're shooting $12 million worth of reshoots on this bullshit fucking movie of which Maria Shriver wrote a draft. 11 writers. One of them was Maria Shriver. So this is kind of like one of those arguments. Bill Daly, the senior VP of Warner Brothers, does this show all the time. We talk about this. Is $2 million going to make a movie from an F to an A? Because if it's only going to make it from an F to a D, you don't get the money. Fuck it. And this was one of those scenarios where we're doing $12 million on a movie that sucks. And so we get down there and there's like a David Spade guy with the headset who's like, gentlemen, so who are you? What are you doing here outside the stage? And Milius has got like his cigar, non-smoking lot. He's like, I'm here to see Schwarzenegger. And the guy's like, all right, doesn't know who Milius is, right? So this is cooking up to go south. Wow. And he's like, and he's doing a David Spade, like, all right. And you are, and Milius just takes the stub of his cigar out of his mouth and just goes, and like exhales all the smoke in this kid's face. And goes, just tell him his boss is here. And I'm like sitting there going, oh man. And so this guy's like coughing up a lung, and Milius is like, I'm looking around to see who else is going to get in on this. We're standing in front of a stage, but Schwarzenegger was in the trailer outside. We didn't realize that was his because it was nondescript for the reshoots. And Schwarzenegger pops out and he's like, what's going on out here? And Milius like goes, they meet up again, and Schwarzenegger goes, they start talking, and Schwarzenegger introduces me, and Arnold puts his hands on my shoulders, and he goes, "You got good shoulders." And I was actually kind of shocked that I was 2 inches taller than him, because I looked at Arnold as like this mammoth of a human being. But as you guys probably know, when you're in the room, it gets much more modest, right? So I was kind of blown away.
Well, wait, how tall are you?
I'm 6'3".
And so they say Arnold's 6'2", but you think he's around 6 foot.
I think I think he comes to here, but not to take anything away from the dude, because he's like larger than life.
Yeah.
But I was kind of surprised. And the thing I loved about him is he would work out in the fitness center. Like if he saw you in there, Esham, he'd be like, "Here, do this." He'd give you something to do. And he'd do it with you. There was no barriers. He would talk to the janitor the same way he talked to the head of the studio. And that I really respected. But he puts his hand on my shoulders and goes, you got good shoulders. But then he points at my gut and goes, "But you look like you've been relaxing." And then he goes to John Milius. He goes, "And you look like you have half the Atlantic Ocean in you." Just like this derogatory stuff. Anyway, I don't know how we got on that diatribe, but Milius was, incredibly gracious, really underappreciated at the time. Filmmakers like yourselves, like genuine filmmakers, you guys are artisans. Like, what he's done and what he respected, but there was also kind of like this modern day, like agency type clique that was like the assistants pool, I would say. And they didn't know shit. They thought they were talking to some dinosaur out of a trailer park. And I'd have to, we would get into it with them all the time, because the guy was responsible for all these works of art we grew up on. Apocalypse, Conan, Red Dawn. And in that building also was Mark Canton, and he had a bunch of assistants that I felt were right out of the mailroom at CAA. No disrespect to them, but they just didn't have appreciation for film. They wanted the business, Does that make sense?
Yep. Oh yeah.
It was like about, can they do a deal and produce something? They didn't know. They didn't care about. Anyway, it's boring stuff, I know, but.
Well, do you think that because, John always encouraged, or I think he encouraged the controversy, right? He embraced it. But I think it unfairly cut his career a little bit short.
We were just talking about that too, because he had just finished The Rough Riders when I started working with him, and he was doing a rewrite for Mike Newell on a Western. And Bill Daly and I were talking, because Bill Daly was at the studio as a senior VP for years, and we were talking about how much we both loved him and how he was really misrepresented in the minds of the brass, as they had him pegged as some sort of barbarian, fascist, and he was really none of those things. Like a lot of what comes across, and he didn't like to do interviews because he said he came across all wrong, which he did. He was really, a lot of it was kind of sense of humor. Like it was like you were saying with the Gauntlet, like you kind of think Clint's winking at you during the movie.
Oh yeah.
Like that's how I think Milius was in a lot of these interviews when he was talking about things. He'd kind of be like, yeah, to see if to tell you, I'll give you a 30-second story that tells you everything you need to know about Milius. You guys have probably met him and know anyway, but
I haven't.
Oh,
I've seen so many interviews with him and admired the man's work so much.
Oh, he's unreal. And what's really sad to me is the movies he did not get a chance to make seem to be like the best ideas. That was what was around his office. These things that the studio thought was too expensive, he was out of favor to do. Those were like the greatest movies you'd hope to see.
NMOSD is a disease that can blind you, paralyze you, or kill you. But the good news is doctors seem to think they're very close to a cure. They also seem to think that a cure for NMOSD will be a cure for cancer. So that's a 2-for-1 that I can't ignore. And if you're like me, you would donate today to the Gotti Jackson Foundation. My name is Steve Surgic, and I approve this message.